Do you know where Jesus' body was after he died and before he rose again? Anybody know that answer? How many? I'm going to take a poll. How many of you say the tomb? Yeah. The choir's looking at me like, hey, we heard your sermon once, buddy. We know what you're going to say. So you think it was in the tomb. The reality is it's not. You want to know why? Because of the Apostles' Creed. After Jesus was crucified and died and was buried, where did he go? He went to hell. That doesn't sound right for Jesus, right? Jesus went to hell. He went there, to do his work that he needed to do within those 3 days prior to his resurrection. But Jesus was definitely somewhere other than we think that he is. Well, we're not quite sure. That's about part of the mystery, right, of the whole thing. But if the Apostles' Creed is true, and we choose to believe that, and most Christians do, probably almost all of them, most of them, then he went and he descended into hell. What was he doing there? Defeating, conquering sin, beating Satan. Now, we never ever talk about that on Easter, do we? Like, what did Jesus do? And listen, I'm not going to talk about it either because I don't want to get bogged down in a bunch of theological, to help us understand Easter. It's enough to know that Jesus was not in the tomb on Easter morning. Upon Jesus' death, he was placed inside a tomb. Stone was rolled away across the entrance, sealing him from the world. And that seemed to be the end of the story, that Jesus died and all the promises he had made died with him, that he would be laid behind a stone, closed off to the future, never to be seen of or heard of or appreciated ever again. That's what they thought. But as it turns out, the moment he died, he was busy conquering hell and death. It turns out, and hopefully you'll read this in the Romans text or you read this with me and you understand this as we go through a little bit of the Romans text, but it turns out that being stuck inside a cave is not Jesus' preferred place to hang out. Not even between the time of his death and his resurrection. Even when Jesus was inside the tomb, he wasn't inside the tomb. Now, that's kind of confusing, isn't it? But give me a little time. Let me see if I can convince you. For all of Lent, this is important. For all of Lent, our church has been discussing what it means to have an inside-out kind of faith. And what we meant by that is to say, we talked about private practices, spiritual disciplines, if you will, the things that were very personal in nature to us as we considered how to build our faith. And we know that the building of our faith has to start internally. God has to get a hold of our hearts, and we've got to do heart work and head work and inwardly focused kind of stuff so that we can start processing the kinds of things we need to process as we think about our faith. Well, Easter is about having an inside-out kind of faith too. But we're not so much concerned as the inside as we are about the outside, and that being the outside application of our faith. Easter's not about Jesus being in the tomb, right? Easter's about Jesus being out of the tomb, not there. And so how does this apply to our faith? The empty tomb is an example of Jesus' bias toward action, to do something about his own faith, being the Son of God. So is it any wonder why we celebrate the empty tomb today that the women didn't find anything except his burial clothes on that first Sunday? Is it any wonder? There's a conversation Jesus had with his disciples. It's a long conversation you can find in all of the Gospels about faith matters and about Jesus' impending crucifixion and death while he's talking with his disciples in the upper room. It's a whole discourse about Jesus doing some teaching. And at one point in the evening, all the disciples are sitting around and they're fellowshipping, and Jesus says, all of you are going to desert me. And you're going to fall away. And they all kind of say, no, no, no. And it's, it's Peter, with the bravado that Peter had, apparently says, I'll never do that. I'll never deny you. And we know what the end result of that was, right? Thank goodness his feet were washed, yeah? Thank God he let Jesus wash his feet. But he says this in Matthew 26:32. After I have risen, after he talks about this whole thing, he says, after I have risen, I will go ahead of you into Galilee. And you can imagine the apostles' heads spinning at this point. Like, what in the world is he talking about? What do you mean after he's risen, he'll go ahead? What is this nonsense? Or what seems to be nonsense? But this is the very reason we celebrate Easter. Because of that statement and the very fact that Jesus was not where he was supposed to be. Had Jesus still been inside, our faith would be for nothing. But Jesus, on that first Easter, gave us the evidence and the example that our faith, following Jesus' example, should be public. Formed on the inside, evidenced on the outside. Our faith is public, or at least it should be. Romans 6:4. For we died and were buried with Christ by baptism. Yoked with Christ. One and the same with Christ. And just as Christ was raised from the dead by the glorious power of the Father, now we also may live new lives. I'm going to read it again. I'm going to change one word and see if you can put it out, or see if you can pick it out. And just as Christ was raised from the dead by the glorious power of the Father, now we also may believe new things. What Paul said was, we have the power to live new lives, not to think or believe that there is a new life. I mean, is there a new life? Yes. Should we believe that? Yes, that's the internal part of our faith. But Paul says we may also live new lives. It's not supposed to stay hidden behind a stone as if it were dead. These new lives of ours are meant to be lived inside out. Jesus is our example of how to follow him into new life. And if what Paul wrote in Romans is true, then our sinful selves have been crucified with Christ. Why is that important to know? Well, because our sinful selves are not the things that we need to worry about showing to the rest of the world. We're free from all of that. Christ died and was raised from the dead, and so we are free from the death consequences of sin. We don't have to think about that stuff anymore. Paul says, if that's true, give yourselves completely to God, for you were dead, but now you have new life. So, Paul didn't stop. Paul said, so use your body as an instrument to do what is right for the glory of God. But I think there's a problem. Have you noticed that there are quite a few people in this world that seem to be stuck in their caves and their tombs? And I'm not just talking about those who don't believe. I'm not just talking about those who think this whole resurrection thing is a bunch of malarkey. I'm talking about some church folk too. Some church folk. But I see some church folk who are stuck inside, most recognize what Christ has done for them and they understand it, yet they don't live the kind of inside-out faith shown by the example of Jesus. For some Christians, for some of us, too, me too, we get too comfortable. It's too nice and cozy. Oh, if the stone's rolled, I could just sit and take a nap. Or, I don't really feel compelled to have to, why do I need to go outside with my faith. I mean, I'm quite happy, thank you very much, learning about the truths of the gospel and what Jesus did and applying them to my own life. And then we're challenged, or we're supposed to be challenged to say that, well, life following Christ is not just believing in Christ, it's following Christ. And we have to understand that it's our job to follow our example. Not one of us is required to descend to hell to do what Jesus did. Nobody's asking you to do that, by the way. You don't have to conquer sin. You don't have to go on the cross. Why? Because Christ did that for you, for all of us. But what we are supposed to do is follow the one who said, I go before you. We're supposed to die with him. We're supposed to rise to life with him. We're supposed to step out of the tomb with him, live an outward-focused Easter life with him. Jesus was not in the tomb. If you haven't recognized that, you might be one of those people hanging around the empty tomb or hanging out in your own. And if that's you, I hope you realize that today. And I hope you'll talk with someone. Call Pastor Nancy or me. Talk to a friend or a neighbor, somebody you trust, and tell them what you think. Begin a conversation. However, if you have recognized that Jesus wasn't in the tomb for you, thank God he wasn't in the tomb for you. But you're afraid to step out into the sunlight and the full freedom of living an inside-out faith, I hope you'll make a decision to trust because Jesus goes before you. And it may be a decision you need to make again. I was telling the other service folks that I'm only 50. I don't know, can you say that, only 50? All right, anyway. Well, I'm only 50. And I've never known a time in my life, I'm only 50, but I've never known a time in my life when I think the gospel needs to be seen and heard and felt in the world around us. We are so lost as a people. And I don't think God is calling me or God is calling you in the sacrifice and death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, the very thing we celebrate today, to sit and do nothing. In any case, no matter where we are in our personal journey, it was never meant to stay a personal journey. It's not enough to believe. I'm going to say it one more time. It's not enough to believe. Is it important to believe? Absolutely. Because without that base of faith, a pretty good understanding of what God has done for you, I don't know what your witness will look like. But it's not enough to believe. Jesus wasn't, I'm going to say it again. Like, why does he keep repeating that? Because I want you to make sure you hear it. Jesus was not in the tomb. Not there. And therefore, neither should we. If it's us, let's stop hanging out in the tombs and the caves of our lives and start applying what Paul was talking about. And that is that because you have new life through Christ, that you should use everything that you can to do the right things that God is asking you to do to show your faith as an inside-out kind of faith. Easter is the reminder that life itself, your new inside-out life, is tied up with Christ. Easter is the reminder that we can, without fear, fully commit ourselves to a life where we may do what is right for the glory of God. Not just think about it, not just study it, not just pray about it, not wait around till somebody else does it, not just tell someone else to do it, but rather as an empty tomb, inside out, Easter people live new lives for all to see. Brothers and sisters, he's not there. He is risen. And he goes before you. Let us live an Easter inside out faith.